Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm Marquita here with Late Nights Early Mornings, and tonight I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different than what I have normally talked about on my channel, and that is some book reviews. So I did mention, if you guys caught the channel update and my little spiel about my Goodreads and Audible, I did mention that I had gotten back into reading, just reading for pleasure. And so one of the things that I think I would like to do on the channel is maybe just like once a month, nothing super frequent, but just once a month, kind of talk about some of the books that I have read or I'm currently reading. And so I want to kick that off this month with a book review. And so that's something that I want to be doing, like I said, probably once a month, and it will probably be popping up on Sundays as part of my Sunday content, where I just do a book review or book reviews, depending on how many books I read for that month, just kind of talking about them, giving my thoughts on them or whatnot, especially if they are relatively new and then maybe something that people are interested in. So I have two books that I want to discuss today, and I don't have the hard copies of either because both of these were Audible selection books that I read. Now, I actually read one in August and one in September, but since we're just starting this, I'm going to go ahead and bring both of those in because they are relatively new books. The first one that I read was, and I know I keep saying read, but honestly I listened to them on Audible. And if you aren't familiar with Audible, before I get into my review, Audible is a service that's offered through Amazon, and it basically is a subscription service that lets you have access to read alouds with books. You can download a book and basically have it read aloud to you. The first book that I want to talk about is Gabrielle Union's book, and it's called Got Anything Stronger. So for those who aren't familiar with her books, this is actually her second book. The first book that she had was called We're Going to Need More Wine, and this is kind of like a part two to that book. And so both books as a whole are, her stories, personal stories about her life. So you get to learn a little bit more about her as a person beyond being the actress that we typically see about her, in the media. So you get to learn a little bit more about her in a personal sense. And the great thing is with Audible is that the narrators are sometimes the authors. So in this case, because it was like personal stories, and Gabrielle Union did write this book, she also was the narrator. So I actually got to hear her tell her story. So that was awesome. I did read her first book when it came out, so I actually owned that and I read it, and I can say it really made a difference having her or being able to hear her tell her story, because you get the emotions as she's going through the different things, whether they're positive or negative situations. You get to really hear her telling the story, so it makes it a lot more personable, even though the stories are very relatable regardless to people, or should be to most people. One of the things that I really loved about the book is just how open and honest that she was in her book. She did not hold back or try and make it kind of like PC. She told some honest truths in there. I really think that the great thing about the stories is that those are things that maybe she couldn't say in an interview, or that she wouldn't necessarily just say, when you see her on TV or in a magazine or whatever. These are things that she's really just spilling from the heart, things that she's experienced, whether good or bad. And I really think it helps you understand her as a person, as a human, even more so than as just that celebrity actress that we see most of the time. A lot of times it's easy to forget that these celebrities do have regular lives outside of the spotlight. They're raising families. They are dealing with the same issues that pretty much every person has dealt with or probably will deal with at some point in their life, whether it be gender issues, race issues, family, dynamics or whatnot. And all of those things are things that she talks about in her book. My favorite part of the book, I must say, is the chapter that she did that's entitled Isis. I believe it was like chapter 14 or 15. And that that chapter is called Isis, and it's about the character that she played in Bring It On. So if you're familiar with Gabrielle Union and her work, you know that she was the black cheerleader in the movie Bring It On, and she was on the opposing team that was going against the Toros, and they were supposedly stealing, or the Toros had been stealing the cheers from this school, which was, Gabrielle Union's school, and she was the captain that particular year. And so they kind of got called out. The Toros got called out when they went over there to watch the cheers, because the current captain of the Toros had no idea that that had been going on. So she thought that the cheers that they were doing were original. And so when another peer took her over to that school to show her where the cheers actually came from, Gabrielle Union, who was the captain, spotted them, called them out, and they thought that, thought she was there to steal more cheers. And so they have a whole confrontation about that. And then the story unfolds with the two teams, battling each other out and whatnot. So if you've seen that movie, Bring It On, you already know what I'm talking about. But in that, Gabrielle talks a lot about having that role and how she feels like she failed that character. She failed Isis. So it's essentially like an open letter to that character. And I know you might think, like, why is she writing to a fictional person? But it's a lot deeper than that. It's talking about, her having that role as a Black female from kind of like an underprivileged or lower served community, because essentially that was like, here's the little hood squad, hood school, whatever, and then you have like the Toros, which was like the upper, predominantly white squad, where they were, pretty wealthy or well-off middle class, upper class families, and then you have like the poor little ghetto school over here, and that was the school in which Gabrielle Union was at, and they were representing. So she talks a lot about that. And even within that movie, she talks about how she tried to give that character some dimension, but honestly the movie focused more on the white character, which I believe was Kristen Dunst was the main character for the captain of the Toros cheerleading squad. So she talks a lot about how the movie focuses on that particular character, and we know all about her background, her story, her life, and then she kind of goes off to have the happy ending with what happens next at the end of the movie. Whereas with Gabrielle's character, we really don't learn much about her. We don't know why she is who she is, like why she responds to things, why she has that personality, her demeanor. We know nothing about her. So she's still very one-dimensional. And when you're talking about stereotypes in terms of race and things like that, she played into the stereotypical like hood Black girl. And that was the thing that Gabrielle Union is saying now, later on in life, that she has been able to reflect, because those are one of her earlier kind of major roles. So she didn't understand certain things that she now understands later in life and in her career. And so she's apologizing to that character for saying, like, I failed you by not making you be who you could be, because she did have a lot of control in terms of developing that character, and she was able to create script and whatever, because the director gave her that ability. And so she felt like she thought she was doing something good at the time, and she thought that she was playing the role properly. She was giving more accurate verbiage and things like that than what they originally had scripted for that character. But now that she looks back on it, she sees how it was an opportunity that she missed to really display and give the world a different view of that character, because she said people tend to view that character as the villain in the movie, which, I mean, essentially she is like the rival. But there are things that are missed, and missed opportunities to learn more about people, or to give the world a view, because we know in real life that exists, that there is the school that has the good resources, the funding, and they can have whatever they want and get things, everything is nice and great, and the kids typically do pretty well at that school and they have bright futures. Whereas in the schools like the ones that Gabrielle Union came from in real life, many of the ones I have worked at with similar situations, those kids don't always get the same opportunities and don't always have those happy endings after graduation, if they even make it to graduation. And a lot of times there are stereotypes placed upon people that come from that area, those types of areas, neighborhoods, and schools. And so that's where Gabrielle Union is apologizing for not being able to give a different type of image to that type of person. So I really, really enjoyed that character, and she really gets into a lot of deep things that make it beyond the movie, and things that even when we were watching the movie, at least not when I watched it as, you know, at a younger age watching that movie, like I see where she's saying now. And I think when people do read that chapter in the book, you will understand, especially if you are a person of color, or if you are familiar with those types of situations. So I really, really enjoyed that. But overall, I really enjoyed that book. I rated it as a 5-star book. It is something that I would highly recommend to anyone, and I think that you can relate to it as a woman, as a Black woman in particular, but really as a woman. She talks about a lot of things that women, no matter what your race or age or, you know, career or whatever, you have probably dealt with as a woman, as a mother, as a friend, as a Black person or a person of color in general, and what things are like in certain careers when you're the only person in the room that looks like you, or you're the first person in the room that's ever been in the room that looks like you. So all of those things, and the stereotypes, the expectations, just everything about being who you are in a place that's not made for you, and how you make your place. And so I really truly enjoyed that book, and I feel like it was a very inspirational book. So again, I'd highly recommend it, and yes, I will be purchasing it when it comes available in paperback. Right now it's only available in hardback, which is how most new books come out. And so I'll just wait for the paperback to add it to my personal library, but I've already read it through Audible. So highly recommend that book if you were thinking about it. If you enjoyed her first book, We're Going to Need More Wine, you'll definitely enjoy this one because she goes even deeper. So you'll really, really enjoy it. But it really is, especially from the Audible edition, it's really like just having a conversation with a good girlfriend. That's what it's sounding like. But even if you're just reading the book without the Audible, I think that her stories are really something relatable to everyone. So that is, again, Got Anything Stronger by Gabrielle Union. The other book that I want to talk about today is Finding Me, and this is a pretty new release, and it's by Viola Davis, which I think is perfect timing to talk about because if you don't know, she just released a movie. Her new movie is called The Woman King, and so I would highly suggest that people go out and see it. I plan on definitely seeing it. But back to her book called Finding Me, that is a memoir, and she also narrated that story, so I got to hear Viola tell her own story. Also another positive experience. So with that book, I really didn't know much about Viola Davis other than, of course, she was an actress, but I didn't know much about her background before that. So this book really gives a lot, starting from her early childhood, her family dynamic, which was very interesting, and I definitely didn't know any of those things that she reveals in the book. So she didn't come from, you know, any type of like a middle class or upper class. One thing you learn about Gabrielle Union is she did come from kind of a middle to upper class family, whereas Viola Davis did not have that type of background. She came from a very, very humble beginning. She had a lot of siblings. One of her parents dealt with different struggles, from, you know, being abusive to alcoholism, and just they didn't live well at all. It's amazing. And I know you've probably seen her on commercials for you know, about the food for the children. I forgot the actual title of that program, but basically it's the program that supports making sure that children have food at school, because it talks about how some students, that's the only food that they get is, you know, the school meals. And so talking about making sure that children aren't hungry, because how can you focus on your academics if you're hungry? And that actually is very personal to her, because that is something that she experienced quite a lot growing up. So she talks a lot about her childhood, and so that's something that I think makes the book really, really special, is that she gives a lot of detail. I'm not gonna say she says the same thing over and over, because she doesn't, but it always comes back to the root of that. But then at the same time, that is kind of what shapes us as people, is, you know, our upbringing and those things that we experience in childhood. And she basically talks about, she keeps referring to that for a reason, and the reason being, she talks about how that impacts her as into adulthood, until she starts to, you know, come to some realizations, get therapy and counseling and things like that, and starts to put the pieces together herself, because there are things that were impacting her that she didn't even realize they were impacting her in certain ways. Like, she knew, like, yes, these things happen, yes, I know that it's affecting me in some way, but when she finally starts to realize like how it impacted her life in terms of how she thinks of even herself, decisions that she makes, how she feels about herself, how she feels about things like relationships. When she starts to put all that together, it helps her kind of understand herself a little bit more. And that's, I think, why the title is appropriately called Finding Me, because she takes you on the journey of how she gets to the woman that we see today, and understanding how, what makes that woman, and understanding how she had to find that woman herself. Like, she didn't even know who she was for the longest, even though other people were seeing her, in a certain light, or saw the greatness in her. She had not quite found that greatness or understood the greatness that she had within. And so that was also a very inspirational book as well. I mean, I would say that was probably the overall message of both books. And that's something that both of those books had in common, is that both women eventually get to the point where they are finding themselves, and they realize who they are and how, in their worth. Because I think both women at some point, both being kind of in a similar career, in the spotlight, celebrity, actress, that type of field, they both realize that as women, and in particular Black women, they are not valued as much as some of their white and younger counterparts, because both of those things play a factor in their careers at some point, age and race. And so they come to realize that, unless they understand their value, and not only understand it, but demand their value in terms of, like, when they're talking about movie roles and salaries and all of that, they had to learn to say, like, this is what I'm worth, and this is what you're gonna pay me. Until then, they start to realize that they were really shortchanging themselves, and that everyone else kind of understood their value, but knew that they didn't understand their value. And so they would throw them something much, much lower than what even some of their co-stars were making, or people that had lesser roles, because those people had either agents, or they themselves had set a standard for what they would and would not work for. And so these are things that both Viola and Gabrielle found themselves learning to navigate in that world, in terms of the acting world, and being both female, Black, and in some cases not fitting the stereotypes of whatever it may be, whether it be the role that they're playing, or the stereotypical person for them, like as Black women in general. Viola talks a lot about that, especially being a darker skinned female, how that impacts her. So it's just a lot of things that I'm sure a lot of people have dealt with in that industry, with all of those things. And then also in general with people, she talks about being teased even as a young child about her, skin tone, her looks, the conditions in which she came from at home. So people knowing that, and not having, clothing, certain types of clothing, her hygiene sometimes growing up. So those are all things that she dealt with, Viola dealt with in her books. So Finding Me was really a good inspirational story, as was Gabrielle. So both of those books, I would say, are very powerful Black women empowerment type stories, but I think they're also empowering for women in general. So I would recommend them to anyone who's looking for that type. So both of those fall in that category. They are both personal and kind of like memoirs, autobiographies per se, but they're told in a way that really help you understand the person. So I really recommend those. Again, 5 stars for the Finding Me story as well, and 5 stars for You Got Anything Stronger by Gabrielle Union. So hopefully you enjoyed these. If you have read either of these books, please give me your thoughts in the comments, and maybe we can talk about it. And you can also pop over to my Goodreads and follow me on there, and we can have a discussion in Goodreads as well. So thanks again for watching. And again, leave me some comments about the books, or if you are considering the books now, maybe if you heard a little bit more about my review, or just your thoughts on either of those books, or the people, which would be Gabrielle Union and Viola Davis. Also, if you have any suggestions for me, I'm open to reading pretty much a little bit of anything. I don't mind trying something new, branching out. But I do like a lot of different books, so if you have any suggestions, feel free to put those in the comments as well. Or if you just have a question about maybe if I've read another book, you can also leave it there in the comments. But for now, thanks again for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed the book reviews. And again, like I said, I'll probably make this a monthly occurrence, so hopefully you'll be popping in to join me once a month, if nothing else. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.